Statistically speaking, the Wild West wasn't just about gunslingers, saloons, and tumbleweeds rolling across empty streets. Sometimes the strangest, most unsettling stories didn't come from the outlaw trail or a high noon duel. They came from the quiet countryside where new settlers thought they were buying a fresh start. Imagine this. You scrape together every cent of your life savings, ride 3 days through blistering heat and rough country, and finally arrive at the farm you've just purchased, only to find 3 towering women already living there watching you from the porch like they've been expecting you all along. That's exactly what happened to Boone Whitmore in 1870's frontier land. He thought he was getting fertile soil, cattle, and isolation. Instead, he found himself tangled in a web of betrayal, broken promises, and an arrangement that went far beyond property rights. And here's the thing, out on the frontier, legal deeds and stamped papers didn't always carry the weight you thought they did. Miles away from the nearest sheriff, justice wasn't found in courtrooms. It was carved out by those who claimed it, often in ways the law would never recognize. Boone wasn't just buying land. Whether he knew it or not, he was stepping into a trap, carefully laid by a man named Marcus Vance, and 3 women who had no intention of being left behind. So before we saddle up and ride into this story of contracts, debts, and unexpected partnerships, make sure you're subscribed to the Sleepy Historian tonight. Drop a comment to let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. We love hearing where these wild tales reach. All right, partners, hold on to your hats. This one is going to test every idea you've ever had about the Wild West. Part 1. The farmhouse that wasn't empty. The deed felt heavier than it should have in Boone Whitmore's weathered hands. He had carried it across 3 days of rough country, through sagebrush, dry canyons, and dust storms that left him tasting grit in his teeth. That piece of paper was supposed to mean security, a fresh start, and a future free of the mistakes and debts that had haunted him in town. It was, quite literally, everything he owned in the world. So why, when he finally reached the farmhouse that the seller had promised was empty, did it suddenly feel like a trap? Boone reined in his horse and stared. 3 women stood on the porch like they had been expecting him all along. Not small-town widows or gentle frontier wives. These were women built like statues of another age, tall and broad-shouldered, their frames casting shadows across the weathered planks. The tallest stepped forward. Her arms looked strong enough to wrestle a steer into the dirt, and the smile that curled her lips never touched her cold blue eyes. "You must be the new owner," she said. Her voice carried the weight of command, like someone accustomed to having her way. There was something else behind it, though, a sharp edge that made the hair rise at the back of Boone's neck. The other 2 shifted at her sides like flanking soldiers. One was dark-haired, her stance steady and deliberate, eyes cool and calculating. The other, a freckled redhead with powerful shoulders, leaned casually against a post, her lips curving in a low, unsettling laugh. Boone tightened his grip on the deed. "Ladies, I think there's been some kind of mistake," he said evenly. His voice betrayed none of the unease crawling up his spine. "This is my property now. I have the legal documents right here." He raised the deed, the ink still crisp from the territorial office. The tall woman's smile widened, teeth flashing just a little too sharp. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, Boone Whitmore. We've been expecting you." The sound of his name chilled him to the bone. No one was supposed to know about this deal. The seller had promised privacy, sworn that the land was clean and clear. So how in God's name did these strangers know not only about the sale, but about him? The dark-haired woman spoke then, her voice deeper than her companion's. "We've been living here for quite some time, taking care of the land, keeping it warm." She emphasized that last word with a strange weight that made Boone's stomach twist in confusion. The redhead laughed again, low and rough. "The previous owner made certain arrangements with us before he left. Arrangements that don't just disappear because you've got a piece of paper. Boone felt the weight of their stares press against him like the desert sun, hard, unrelenting, inescapable. They weren't confused neighbors. They weren't harmless squatters. Every movement, every look carried calculation like predators, measuring whether their prey would fight or fold. The memory of the sale came back in sharp detail. The seller had been eager, too eager to close the deal. Marcus Vance, though he'd called himself just Mark, had all but shoved the documents into Boone's hands. Boone had chalked it up to desperation for cash. Now, staring at these women, the truth pressed against him like the barrel of a loaded gun. He'd walked right into something designed. His mouth was dry when he asked, "What kind of arrangements?" The tall woman's eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite amusement. She let the silence stretch, savoring the tension before she answered. "The kind that involve you staying here with us, permanently." Then, with a pause that seemed to split the air in two, she said it. "You're gonna have sex with us, Boone. All three of us. That's how this works." The words hit him like a fist to the chest. Not seduction, not an invitation, a decree. His hand twitched toward the rifle holstered on his horse, though instinct told him these three would be quicker. He froze, caught between fear and disbelief. What was this place he had bought into? What kind of game had Marcus Vance been playing? "I don't know what kind of game you're trying to run here," Boone said finally, forcing iron into his voice, though his gut felt like water. "But I paid good money for this land. I'm not going anywhere." The tall woman chuckled, a sound without warmth. "Oh, Boone, this isn't a game. This is business." Her arm swept toward the farmhouse behind her like a queen presenting her throne. "The man who sold you this land owed us something. A debt doesn't disappear just because he ran off with your money." The redhead descended a step, boots heavy on the wood. "Marcus Vance made promises he couldn't keep. He said he'd work the land with us, be our partner. When he failed, he promised the next owner would take his place." Her green eyes burned into him. "That would be you." For the first time since he arrived, true panic stabbed through Boone. Marcus Vance, Mark, the liar who'd made this deal sound so sweet. The man had sold him more than a property. He'd sold him into a nightmare, and now the nightmare was staring him down with three sets of unblinking eyes. Part 2. Promises Marcus couldn't keep. Boone's pulse hammered in his ears as he tried to steady himself against the sudden shift in reality. He had ridden 3 long days to claim what was supposed to be a fertile, isolated land. Now, instead of quiet fields and empty barns, he was facing 3 strangers who claimed not only the soil beneath his boots, but a piece of him as well. He raised the date again, though his hand trembled slightly. "This document is legal, filed, witnessed, and sealed. Whatever Marcus promised you." The tall woman cut him off with a smile that finally shed any trace of friendliness. "Legal documents mean nothing out here when you're 3 days from the nearest sheriff, and even farther from anyone who might care what happens to you." Her boots thudded against the dry earth as she stepped closer. She was easily 6 feet tall, and Boone could see the strength in her arms, the kind that came from years of physical labor. She was not bluffing. The redhead, her freckles glowing in the fading sun, reached into her pocket and produced a folded paper. The corners were creased and dirty, but the official letterhead, the seal pressed into the bottom, was enough to make Boone's throat tighten. She handed it over with deliberate slowness. "We have our own paperwork," she said, her voice low. "Oh, and steady. Contracts Marcus signed, agreements that mention very clearly the transfer of obligations to any future owner." Boone hesitated before taking it. His hand brushed hers, and though her skin was warm, the sensation was like ice in his chest. He unfolded the document and stared. It looked official, too official. The name Marcus Vance scrawled across the bottom in bold ink, an embossed seal that matched the kind of forms he himself had seen at the territorial office. The language was smooth, full of phrases like mutual support, partnership in all operations, and shared companionship. Ambiguous enough to mean anything, dangerous enough to mean exactly what these women wanted it to mean. His mouth was dry as he muttered, "You're bluffing. No court would honor a contract like this, not one that—" He stopped himself from saying the word sex, but it hung unspoken between them. The dark-haired woman stepped down from the porch, her boots sinking slightly into the dust as she closed the distance. Her presence was like a storm cloud rolling over. "Who said anything about courts?" she asked. "We handle our own justice out here." She moved with the confidence of someone who had never once been bested in a fight. Boone's instinct was to step back, and he hated himself for it. He had faced danger before, bandits, wolves, a knife fight behind a saloon, but nothing about. Those encounters had left him so utterly unmoored. The tall woman finally gave names. "My name is Helena," she said, her tone almost casual. She gestured toward the dark-haired figure. "This is Ruth?" Then to the redhead and Magdalene. They stood together like a wall. Helena's eyes glinted with authority, Ruth's with quiet menace, and Magdalene's with sharp, unflinching intelligence. "We've been waiting for you, Boone," Helena continued. "Marcus described you perfectly." The casual use of his first name was another knife to the gut. How much had Marcus told them? How much of his life, his plans, his weaknesses, had he sold along with this land? "Whatever Marcus told you about me," Boone said, his voice tightening, "he had no right. I bought this property in good faith. I'm not bound to his schemes." Helena tilted her head, and for the first time, Boone thought he saw something flicker across her face that wasn't menace. It was something softer, almost wistful. "Good faith," she repeated quietly, as though the words were foreign. "That's refreshing. Marcus wasn't much for good faith, especially toward the end." Her gaze softened, and Boone felt her, studying him, not as prey, but as someone she was measuring against her own loneliness. Ruth circled him slowly, her steps deliberate. Marcus was all charm and empty promises. He swept in here talking about partnership, about building a life with us. 3 months later, he was already looking for an exit. Magdalene's voice broke in, raw and sharp with emotion. "He used us, took advantage of our work, our affections." She faltered at the last word, and for a heart's beat, Boone glimpsed hurt behind her fierce eyes. "Then he ran off with the money from selling the land we improved, left us with nothing but words on paper." The puzzle began to make sense, though not in a way that comforted him. These weren't just squatters running a scam. They had been betrayed, strung along, and discarded by Marcus Vance. To them, Boone wasn't just a new landowner. He was the replacement, the man Marcus had promised them would come. Helena stepped close again, so close Boone could catch the faint scent of lavender soap. Her voice softened, though the edge never left it. "We have a claim here, Boone, not just to the land, but to what we were promised, what Marcus committed to and then abandoned." Her eyes locked with his, and for the first time since his arrival, Boone felt something that wasn't fear. It was dangerous, confusing, and undeniable, a strange pull toward the very people who had just threatened to make him theirs. He didn't trust it, he didn't understand it, but it made his pulse quicken in a way no deed, no contract, no frontier gamble ever had. Part 3. Wounds beneath the threats. The evening wind carried dust across the yard, blurring the line between horizon and earth, as Boone tried to hold his ground against the three figures who had turned his fresh start into a nightmare. Yet the longer he looked at them, the less certain he was that this was simple intimidation. There was steel in their words, yes, but beneath it, something else lingered. Hurt. Helena, the towering leader, studied him like she was peeling back layers of armor. Ruth paced at his flank, deliberate, predatory, but her eyes didn't gleam with cruelty. They gleamed with experience with a kind of sadness that weighed more than malice. And Magdalene, the redhead whose laughter had first struck him as dangerous, carried a tension in her stance that looked suspiciously like longing. Boone forced his voice steady. Even if that paper you've got is real, I never signed it. I can't be bound by promises another man made. Ruth let out a short laugh, bitter as burned coffee. You really don't understand how far from town you are, do you? Out here, promises are kept because we decide they're kept, not because some judge bangs a gavel. The word scraped against him, but Boone noticed something in the way she looked at Helena when she said it, something deferential, almost protective. Magdalene's voice cut in, sharp but trembling at the edges. Marcus wasn't just a liar, he made us believe in him. He lived under this roof, broke bread with us, worked beside us. Her throat tightened. She stopped, took a breath, then finished in a tone that carried too much weight to be casual. He used us, our work, our affections. Then he sold the land from under us like we were nothing. The bitterness in her voice made Boone's chest tighten. He had imagined con artists, a gang waiting to rob him, or squatters too stubborn to leave. But this was different. These women weren't parasites. They had been partners. And they had been abandoned. Helena's blue eyes never left his. We're not saying you're Marcus, you're different. But the land, this home, everything we've built, it doesn't exist without us. We've poured ourselves into it. That makes us more than tenants, more than squatters. It makes us owners in every way that matters. Her words landed harder than he expected. She wasn't lying. Boone could see it in the set of her jaw, the faint tremor in her hands when she spoke about betrayal. Marcus Vance hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen their sense of safety. The silence thickened, pressing down on all of them until Boone finally muttered, "Show me the contract." Magdalene unfolded it carefully, as though it were scripture. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind of stationery a man used when he wanted to make an impression. Boone's eyes moved across the elegant script. Partnership agreement, farming operations, profit sharing, mutual support, companionship for all parties involved. The words were a cage dressed up as a promise. Marcus had been clever, too clever. He had bound them to him with paper that was just vague enough to twist any way he pleased. Marcus was a poet with lies, Ruth said, quietly, standing close enough now that Boone caught the scent of earth and bread clinging to her skin. He promised us forever. We believed him. We built systems, carved irrigation ditches, brokered trade. We thought it was for all of us. But it was just for him. Helena's voice softened, her tall frame leaning slightly closer. We aren't asking you to be Marcus. We're asking you to see us, to understand we've got nowhere else to go. This land is all we have left. Boone felt his resistance faltering. These weren't strangers trying to trick him. They were women clinging to what remained after betrayal had gutted them. And though every rational part of him screamed that he should mount his horse, ride back to town, and find a sheriff, something in him couldn't. He looked at each of them in turn. Helena's commanding presence masked a deep loneliness. Ruth's stern confidence carried a plea beneath it. Magdalene's fierceness was little more than armor over an open wound. Against his better judgment, Boone asked the question that shifted everything. What exactly are you proposing? The three women exchanged glances, silent words flashing between them like sparks. Boone realized in that moment that whatever came next would change not just this evening, but his entire life. Helena stepped forward, her imposing frame somehow gentler now, her tone carrying warmth that hadn't been there before. We're proposing a real partnership, not the half-hearted mess Marcus left behind. We work the land together, share the profits equally, and... She paused, meeting his gaze with startling directness. We share our lives. The weight of her words settled over him like dusk falling across the yard. For the first time since arriving, Boone wasn't thinking about deeds or contracts or debts. He was thinking about them. And he was terrified to admit to himself that the idea didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like possibility. Part for the farm they built, the weight of Helena's words lingered in the dry air. We share our lives. It wasn't a demand anymore, not a trap. It was an invitation. Dangerous, yes, but an invitation all the same. Boone's practical nature clawed for control. If this is about partnership, he said carefully, then I need to see what I'd be partnering with. Show me what you've built. Helena exchanged a look with Ruth, and for the first time since Boone had arrived, a flicker of relief softened her hard expression. She nodded. Ruth, take him. Ruth motioned for Boone to follow. As they walked away from the farmhouse, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields. Boone braced himself for disappointment. Patchy soil, half-dead crops, maybe a few starving cattle. But as they rounded a stand of scrub oak, what he saw left him momentarily speechless. An intricate system of channels carved into the earth spread across the field like veins. Water trickled steadily through them, drawn from a spring that bubbled faintly nearby. The flow was measured precise, carrying just enough to each section of cultivated ground. Rows of vegetables pushed up in neat green lines. Young grain stalks swayed gently in the breeze. Ruth's voice held both pride and defiance as she explained. I designed this system. Every ditch, every sluice. Marcus took credit for it when traders came through, but every inch was dug by our hands. Boone crouched, ran his hand through the cool water. The engineering was solid. Ruth had thought ahead, drainage for floods, storage for dry weeks. He looked up at her, and though her stance was firm, there was vulnerability in her eyes, waiting for judgment. You did all this yourselves, he asked, her chin lifted, every stone, every furrow, and we'll keep it running long after Marcus is forgotten. Boone found himself nodding. The work wasn't amateur. It was professional, better than many ranches he had seen owned by men with far more money and manpower. Magdalene joined them then, her red hair bright against the evening sky. She led them past the irrigation fields to the pastures beyond. Dozens of cattle grazed on grass that looked healthier than most ranges in the territory. A chicken coop stood nearby, solidly built with hens clucking as they scratched. Pens held goats and pigs, all well fed. We've established trade routes with 3 different settlements, Magdalene said briskly. Her voice was businesslike, but her green eyes flicked toward him, searching for his reaction. We sell beef, grain, eggs, enough to turn a profit each season. The operation is thriving, not just surviving. Boone's skepticism, brick by brick, began to crumble. This wasn't a scam, this was real. Productive land, healthy livestock, structured trade. He had expected chaos. Instead, he found efficiency and vision. By the time they circled back to the farmhouse, his mind was racing in a new direction entirely. Inside, the home smelled faintly of bread and wood smoke. The kitchen was spacious, with a long wooden table built sturdy enough to endure years of shared meals. The sitting room held chairs arranged in a circle, clearly designed for conversation rather than show. Quilts covered the beds, shelves of books lined one wall, worn but carefully kept. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't ostentatious. It was something rarer, warmth, a sense of belonging. Helena watched his eyes take it all in. Her voice was quieter now. We've kept this house alive, not for Marcus, for us, for whoever believed in it enough to stay. Boone felt the lump in his throat before he could swallow it down. He had ridden here imagining solitude, a place to bury his past. Instead, he was standing in a home that radiated the one thing he hadn't admitted to himself he wanted: connection. Ruth rested a hand lightly on the back of a chair. We're not asking for an answer today, she said gently. This is a lot. We know it, but if you stay, you'll stay because you choose to. Not because Marcus forced you. We want you to be certain before you commit to anything. Her words struck him more than Helena's threats ever had. They weren't demanding a hostage. They were asking for a partner. Boone tried to keep his tone firm, but the truth slipped through anyway. You've built something remarkable here. The three women exchanged a glance, and for the first time since his arrival, their united front didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a family. And though the rational part of Boone screamed warnings, another part whispered something far more dangerous. Maybe, just maybe, this was what he had been searching for all along. Part 5. Debts in the Ledger. The mood at the farmhouse shifted as evening set in. The four of them shared a meal, bread still warm from the oven, stewed beans, roasted chicken from their own coop. Boone found himself relaxing despite the whirlwind of the day. The women moved around each other with an ease that only came from years of shared labor, passing plates without words, finishing each other's tasks without asking. It was during the clearing of dishes that Helena's tone changed. She set a plate down slowly, her hand lingering on the wood as though bracing herself. "There's something else you need to know," she said. Boone froze, the warm contentment in his chest tightening into suspicion again. "What is it?" Magdalene crossed to a drawer, pulled out a heavy leather-bound ledger, and laid it on the table with a thud that spoke of years of entries. Her expression was grim, the sharpness in her eyes harder than he'd seen all day. "Marcus left us with more than broken promises," she said. "He left debts in our name." Boone opened the book. Neat columns of numbers stretched across the pages, transactions recorded with meticulous detail, supplies ordered, equipment purchased, all charged to the women's reputation. His stomach sank as he tallied silently in his head. The total was staggering, enough to ruin any small operation. "How much?" he asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Ruth's voice was steady but quiet. "Enough to cost us everything if we can't pay within the month. The traders have been patient because they know our work is solid, but patience runs dry." The ledger blurred for a moment as Boone realized the scope of Marcus Vance's treachery. It hadn't been enough for the man to steal their affections, their labor, their land. He had gutted their reputation too, cashing in on the goodwill these women had built, and then vanishing before the reckoning came due. Magdalene folded her arms. "We could have hidden this, waited until you signed papers, until you were too far in to back out. But that's not how we work. If we're talking about partnership, you need to see everything, even the rot Marcus left behind." Boone's chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from something like reluctant admiration. They were laying their cards on the table, knowing full well it might send him riding away before dawn. He ran a hand over his face, then down the length of the ledger. "Well, Marcus really did a number on you," he muttered. Helena's eyes locked onto his, and for once her strength seemed to crack. Tears she had been holding back glistened before she blinked them away. "We tried to build something here, Boone. He used it all against us. We're tired of fighting ghosts." For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing against the shutters and the faint crackle of the kitchen fire. Boone stared at the figures again, weighing them, like a rancher counts head of cattle before winter. Finally, he closed the book gently. "The debts are heavy, but not impossible. I still have capital from selling my last holdings, enough to pay this down and invest in expansion." All three women froze. Ruth's hand tightened on the back of a chair. Magdalene's lips parted, her usual sharpness replaced by a stunned silence. Helena's composure broke entirely, a tear slipping free down her cheek. But Boone wasn't finished. He straightened in his chair, his voice taking on the tone he used when striking business deals. "I'll help, but under conditions. This has to be legitimate. Legal partnership papers, equal shares, clear agreements on responsibilities. And as for personal matters, they develop naturally. No pressure. No obligations left over from Marcus. The silence that followed felt like the holding of breath before rain breaks. Then Helena let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears. That's all we ever wanted. A partner. Someone who sees us as equals. Ruth reached across the table, her strong hand closing. Around Boone's, Magdalene gave the barest of nods, but her eyes shone with something raw and unguarded. In that moment, Boone realized what had begun as the worst day of his life might be the start of something far greater. He wasn't just saving a farm, he was saving 3 lives and perhaps his own. Part 6. A family of their own making. 3 months later, the same farmyard where Boone Whitmore had once stood clutching his deed in defiance looked almost unrecognizable. The dry soil was now crisscrossed with stronger irrigation channels, carrying water across lush green fields. The pastures rippled with well-fed cattle, their hides gleaming in the morning sun. Chickens clucked noisily in their coop, and the steady hammer of Ruth mending a fence echoed in the distance. The transformation wasn't just the land, it was Boone himself. Where once he had been a solitary man, intent on carving out a future. In isolation, he now stood shoulder to shoulder with 3 women who had become more than partners. Together, they had taken the wreckage Marcus Vance left behind and turned it into something thriving. Helena had proven herself his equal in strategy. She managed negotiations with traders with a natural authority that even hardened men respected. Where Boone's mind calculated numbers, hers saw opportunities. Their conversations stretched late into the night, their bond deepening beyond business into a quiet, steady affection. Ruth, with her inventive mind, had become indispensable. Her irrigation system had doubled crop yields, and her ideas for crop rotation promised long-term prosperity. Working beside her in the fields, Boone often found himself listening more than speaking, her calm voice a balm against the weight of frontier life. The gentle moments they shared, passing a water skin, repairing a plow together, had blossomed into something tender, something a Boone had never expected to find. Magdalene had been the hardest to reach. Fierce and cautious, she had built walls, higher than the barn roof. But little by little, those walls cracked. Her laughter around the dinner table no longer sounded edged with suspicion. The morning she had kissed him, sudden and unplanned while they leaned against a half-mended fence, had changed the air between them forever. What had begun as wariness had grown into fierce loyalty and slowly trust. Their arrangement was unconventional, even unthinkable by society's standards. Yet within the farmhouse walls, it worked. They had created a rhythm of life that blended business with intimacy, labor with companionship. It wasn't always simple. Jealousies flared, decisions sparked debates, and the weight of secrecy pressed hard, for they all knew the wider world would never accept the family they had forged, but the bonds between them proved stronger than the doubts. The legal papers had been drawn up properly this time. Equal partners, each with rights and responsibilities. The debts Marcus had left were paid in full. The traders satisfied and eager to continue business with the now thriving operation. Profits were reinvested into new livestock and expanded fields. For the first time in years, Boone felt the horizon. Wasn't closing in, but opening wide. One evening, the 4 of them gathered on the newly expanded porch. The sunset painted the sky in orange and violet, stretching across fields that testified to their hard work. Helena settled beside Boone, her arm brushing his as Ruth and Magdalene brought out cups of coffee. "Any regrets?" Helena asked softly, her blue eyes reflecting the fire of the setting sun. Boone looked at each of them in turn. Helena's commanding strength tempered by kindness, Ruth's quiet wisdom glowing in her smile. Magdalene's fiery independence softened by the loyalty She now shared with him. He thought of the man he had been 3 months earlier, standing terrified before them, clutching a deed that had seemed worthless in the face of their claim. "Only one," he said finally. They all turned to him. "I regret that it took Marcus, Vance's betrayal, to bring us together. We could have been doing this even longer." Their laughter rose into the twilight, warm and unguarded, carrying across the fields like music. In that moment, Boone understood what he had found here. Not just land, not just profit, not even just companionship. He had found a family that chose its own rules, defined its own love, and refused to bend to the narrow expectations of the world beyond their farm. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, and lonely, but together they had made it fertile, hopeful, alive. And for the first time in years, Boone Whitmore knew without doubt that he had found exactly where he belonged.